The Eidolon ring was currently suffering through the zenith of white day, a 72-hour cycle, where the orbital station's rotation locked it into a direct, unblinking stare with the sun. The photochromatic shields on the upper levels had thinned to allow for maximum solar harvesting, turning every corridor into an overexposed photograph. The light was clinical merciless and inescapable. It bleached the shadows out of the corners and made every smudge on the plasma glass viewports look like a moral failing. Philip squinted against the glare, feeling the familiar throb of a migraine pulsing behind his left eye. To the wealthy residents of the Upper Ring White Day was a celebration of energy and abundance, a time for garden parties in the artificial arboretums. To a maintenance engineer like Philip, it just meant the thermal exchangers were screaming for mercy, and the air recyclers smelled faintly of ozone and burning dust. He checked his wrist chronometer. It was 3:17 in the afternoon. He was late. His boots clanked heavily on the metal grating of Sector 4's transport hub. He was still wearing his gray utility flight suit, the one with the grease stain on the shoulder that no amount of sonic cleaning could remove. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who fixed the things other people broke. A man who had traded the prestigious wings of a rescue pilot for the steady, unglamorous gravity of a paycheck that kept a roof over his daughter's head. "Tessa," he muttered, breaking into a jog as the maglev transport hissed to a halt in front of the learning center. The doors slid open with a pneumatic sigh. The waiting area was a chaotic sea of children and adolescents, a mix of humans and various non-Terran species, all vibrating with the pent-up energy of the school day's end. Philip spotted her immediately. Tessa was sitting on a floating bench, her legs swinging back and forth in a rhythm that suggested supreme boredom. She was 10 years old, going on 30, with hair that refused to be tamed and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She was currently manipulating a holographic interface with rapid-fire finger movements, likely engaged in a sticker war with a friend 3 sectors away. "Target acquired," Philip said, stepping up to her. "Apologies for the delay. The atmospheric scrubbers on Level 9 decided to stage a mutiny." Tessa didn't look up immediately. She swiped a neon green cat sticker across her screen before deactivating the device. "It is fine, Dad. I used the extra time to calculate the probability of you arriving before 3:20. You are safe. By 3 minutes. "Glad to know I am beating the odds," Philip said, offering a hand to help her down, which she ignored, jumping down herself with a splash of gravity assist boots. "Let us go. I promise to make that synthetic pasta you tolerate." As they turned toward the transit lifts, Philip's personal comms unit buzzed against his wrist. It wasn't the rhythmic pulse of a work order or the sharp staccato of a station alert. It was a long, smooth vibration, almost hesitant. He raised his wrist. A message hovered in the air, projected in crisp blue text against the blinding white of the station corridor. Sender unknown, ID profile, IDA subject, urgent proposal message. "Be my fake boyfriend for my ex's wedding." Philip blinked. The light of the station must have been frying his optic nerves. He stopped walking, causing a small traffic jam of service drones behind him. "Dad," Tessa asked, stopping and looking back. "Did the scrubbers revolt again?" "No," Philip said, staring at the floating text. "I think I just received spam. Or a hallucination." He reached out to swipe the message away, his finger hovering over the delete icon. It was ridiculous. He was a 40-year-old widower with a grease stain on his shoulder and a bank account that wept at the end of every month. He was nobody's fake boyfriend. He was barely a real functioning adult on some days. "Let me see," Tessa said, her curiosity piqued. Before Philip could lower his arm, she stood on her tiptoes. Her eyes scanned the text faster than his tired brain could process. "A gig?" Tessa asked brightly. "Like the casting call for the drama club?" "No, Tessa, it is not a... The pay must be good for a wedding," She reasoned, her finger darting out before Philip could intercept it. She didn't hit delete. She didn't hit block. With the precise, terrifying confidence of a child raised on digital interfaces, she tapped the button that pulsed softly at the bottom of the message. Yes. Tessa. Philip yelped, pulling his arm back as if he had been burned. The blue text vanished, replaced instantly by a swirling gold vortex of data processing. A melodic chime, suspiciously cheerful, rang out from his device. Confirmation received. Subject Philip Marlowe. Status security, clearance pre-authorized. Event the Union of House Vance. House Corrigan. Instruction. Report to Sector 1. Grand Suite for fitting immediately. Philip felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold despite the oppressive solar heat of the station. Tessa, he whispered, his voice cracking. What did you just do? Tessa looked at the golden confirmation message unperturbed. I accepted the job for you. You are always saying we need more credits for the upgrade to our living quarters. Acting is easy. You just lie, but with better posture. You did not just accept a job, Philip said, gripping his wrist as if he could throttle the device. You just signed a contract. A social contract, maybe a legal one. Tessa, you cannot just click buttons on people's lives. Dad, relax, Tessa said, adjusting her backpack. I only sold you for a day. It is 24 hours. How bad can it be? The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open with a soft whoosh, cutting off Philip's retort. The figure that stepped out silenced the entire corridor. She was tall, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that made the human pedestrians look like stumbling toddlers. She was clearly not human, though she possessed a bipedal symmetry. Her skin was a pale, dusting twilight, violet covered in a microscopic velvet fur that shimmered under the harsh lights. Her ears were situated higher on her head, tapering to elegant points, but currently they were swiveled slightly back, flattened in a way that suggested anxiety. She wore a tunic of shifting silk that seemed to flow like water, but what caught Philip's attention was the collar around her neck, a sleek, high-tech piece of engineering that hummed with a low frequency. Floating beside her right shoulder was a spherical drone, white and perfectly smooth, the size of a grapefruit. She stopped directly in front of Philip and Tessa, her eyes large and possessing vertical slit pupils like a feline scanned Philip from his messy hair to his scuffed boots. She didn't speak. Instead, she raised her hands. Her fingers were long-tipped with retractable claws that were currently sheathed. She made a series of rapid, intricate movements, touching her chin, her chest, weaving patterns in the air. The white drone Mochi projected a holographic subtitle in the air between them, the font crisp and serif-free. You are taller than your data profile suggested. Good. It makes the lie more physically imposing. Philip stared at the text, then at the woman. You must be Ida. She didn't react to his voice. She didn't even blink. Her eyes remained locked on his face, but not on his eyes. She was watching his lips, his throat, the subtle movements of his expression. The drone projected a new line. I am Ida. I am deaf. Please face me when you speak so I can read your micro-expressions, or simply wait for Mochi to translate. Deaf. Philip repeated, the engineer in him immediately cataloging the tech. The collar was a haptic feedback system. It converted sound waves into vibrations against her skin. She was literally feeling his voice. Right. Okay. Look, Miss Ida, there has been a mistake. My daughter, Ida's hands, moved again, sharp and cutting. No mistake. You fit the algorithm, single, paternal instinct, financially motivated, but possessing a dormant moral compass. And you were a pilot. You know how to crash land without killing everyone on board. That is all I need today. I am not crashing anything, Philip said, his voice rising slightly. And I am not your boyfriend. I am a maintenance engineer who needs to go home and make pasta. Ida tilted her head. Her ears twitched, catching the vibration of his agitation. She signed again, her expression unreadable, somewhere between amusement and desperation. I do not need a lover. I need a shield. My ex is getting married. I need to walk in there, retrieve something that belongs to me, and walk out. If I go alone, the narrative will eat me alive. If I go with you, a rugged, stable human man, I am just a guest moving on with her life. Rugged, Tessa whispered loudly. She means messy, Dad. Quiet, you, Philip hissed. He looked back at Ida. I am sorry, truly, but I do not do weddings, especially high society ones. I have... He trailed off, the old bitterness rising in his throat. I have an allergy to pretension. He turned to grab Tessa's hand. Come on, we are leaving. Mr. Marlowe, a new voice cut through the air. It didn't come from the drone. It came from the elevator behind Ida. A man stepped out. He was human, or at least he had started that way. He was dressed in the severe, high-collared black suit of a protocol butler, the elite staff who managed the lives of the station's aristocracy. His posture was so erect it looked painful. I am Arden, the man said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. I manage the ceremonial logistics for the Vance Corrigan Union. Philip stiffened. Good for you. We were just leaving. I am afraid that is impossible, Arden said, tapping a datapad in his hand. When your daughter authorized the confirmation, your biometric signature was uploaded to the Sector 1 security grid as a primary guest. You are now part of the checked list. So uncheck me, Philip snapped. Arden offered a thin, pitying smile. To remove a confirmed primary guest less than 4 hours before the ceremony triggers an automatic fraud investigation. The system will assume you were attempting to infiltrate a high-security event using false pretenses. Your station clearance will be suspended pending an inquiry. Philip felt his stomach drop. Suspended for how long? The backlog for fraud inquiries is currently 6 weeks, Arden said pleasantly, during which time your access to the maintenance hangars, your pay credits, and your residency permit for this sector will be frozen. 6 weeks. Philip looked at Tessa. 6 weeks without pay meant eviction. It meant losing Tessa's spot at the learning center. It meant disaster. This is blackmail, Philip said, turning back to Ida. Ida watched him, her golden eyes calm. She signed slowly, and Mochi translated the words in a soft, glowing blue. It is not blackmail. It is bureaucracy. I did not write the security protocols, Philip. I just navigate them. Be my guest for 1 day. Wear the suit. Eat the expensive food. Hold my hand. And tomorrow your account will be heavier by 5,000 credits. 5,000 credits? That was 6 months of rent. That was the new atmospheric filter for Tessa's bedroom, so she stopped coughing at night. Philip exhaled a long, defeated sound. Fine. Fine. 1 day. Tessa pumped her fist silently. Excellent, Arden said, stepping aside and gesturing to the elevator. The fitting is in the glass conservatory. We must hurry. The bride is meticulous about the visual symmetry of the broadcast. Philip ushered Tessa into the elevator, followed by the fluid, silent grace of Ida. As the doors closed, shutting out the blinding white corridor, Philip leaned back against the cool metal wall. So, Philip said, looking at Ida, making sure she could see his lips. Who is the lucky groom or bride? Who is this ex we are trying to impress? Ida didn't answer immediately. She watched the floor numbers climb. Level 5. Level 6. The air grew cleaner, richer, smelling of real jasmine and money. She signed one word. Viola. Philip froze. The name hit him like a hull breach, sudden, violent, and sucking the oxygen right out of the room. Viola, Philip choked out. Viola Vance. Arden, standing by the control panel, glanced back. Of course. Viola Vance, the director of station media. It is the wedding of the season. Surely you knew. Philip felt the walls of the elevator closing in. He looked at Tessa. She was busy inspecting a smudge on the elevator door, oblivious to the fact that her father's heart had just stopped beating. Viola, his ex-wife. The woman who had walked out of their small, cramped apartment 5 years ago because she couldn't breathe in his world. The woman who had left him with a 5-year-old Tessa and a note saying she had a destiny that didn't include grease stains and budget rations. He was about to attend his ex-wife's wedding. To someone else. As the fake boyfriend of he looked at Ida, she was watching him with an intensity that was unnerving. She knew. She had to know. You knew, Philip said, his voice barely a whisper. He forgot to face her, but she seemed to catch the vibration of his accusation anyway. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. She smelled of something cool and electric like a storm in high atmosphere. She reached out her hand, hovering near his wrist but not touching. She signed, and Mochi projected the text right in front of his eyes. I knew she was your ex-wife, just as she is my ex-something. We are both debris in her wake, Philip. I cannot do this, Philip said, panic rising in his chest. I cannot watch her. I cannot let Tessa see her like that, up there. Perfect. Happy without us. The elevator chimed. They had reached the top. The doors opened to reveal the glass conservatory. It was breathtaking, a massive dome of transparent aluminum that looked out into the naked cosmos. The sunlight here was filtered through prismatic shields, turning the harsh white glare into a soft golden kaleidoscope. Lush, genetically modified greenery cascaded from floating planters. It was a paradise, floating in a vacuum. And in the center of it all, projected on massive screens that lined the walkway, was Viola's face. She was radiant, smiling, that perfect, calculated smile that had once made Philip feel like the only man in the galaxy, before he realized he was just a prop in her scene. Philip stopped at the threshold. He couldn't move his feet. The weight of his failures, his failed marriage, his stalled career, his inability to give Tessa this kind of life, pinned him to the floor. Ida stopped beside him. She didn't push him. She didn't mock him. She turned, blocking his view of the screens with her own body. Her ears swiveled forward, focusing on him. She tapped her chest, then pointed at him. A direct connection. She signed, simple and stark. What do you fear most? Philip looked down at her. He looked at the tactile collar around her neck, the way she stood in a world of silence, navigating it with a courage he couldn't fathom. I fear, Philip started, then looked at Tessa. Tessa had walked ahead, mesmerized by a floating fountain. She looked small against the grandeur of the conservatory. She looked out of place in her scuffed sneakers. I fear she will be dragged back in, Philip whispered, facing Ida. I fear Viola will look at Tessa and see an accessory she forgot to pack. I fear my daughter will be used as a pawn in a game I cannot afford to play. Ida nodded. It was a sharp, decisive motion. Then, do not play her game, Mochi translated the text, glowing red, now urgent. Play mine. Viola wants a perfect broadcast. She wants control. You and I, we are the glitch. We are the variable she cannot predict. She stepped closer, her golden eyes narrowing. If you turn back now, you are just the man she left behind. If you walk in there with me, you are the man who moved on. You protect your daughter by showing her that her mother does not own the world. Philip looked at Tessa again. She was reaching out to touch the water of the fountain. Her face lit up with wonder. She deserved to see the beautiful things. She deserved to be here, not as a prop, but as a person. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive flowers and recycled air. He straightened his spine, pushing the tired maintenance engineer down deep, and letting the pilot, the man who used to fly into solar flares to save stranded ships, take the controls. One day, Philip said, and 5,000 credits. Ida's ears twitched, a sign he would later learn meant satisfaction. She extended her arm, bending the elbow, offering him a space to link his. "One day," she confirmed. Philip hooked his arm through hers. The fabric of her tunic was cool and slippery. As they stepped forward across the threshold of the conservatory, Mochi projected one last message, flashing it briefly before fading into stealth mode. "Warning, if you enter you will see the truth Viola has always hidden. Do not blink." Philip felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the station's air conditioning. He tightened his grip on Ida's arm, signaled for Tessa to follow, and walked into the light. The establishment was called the Chrysalis, a name that felt entirely too organic for a place that smelled of ozone and ionized silk. It was tucked away in the upper stratification of the Eidolon ring, where the gravity was kept at a precise 98% of Earth standard to accommodate the delicate bone structures of the avian diplomats. Philip stood on a circular pedestal that hummed beneath his boots. He felt ridiculous. He felt like a biological specimen being prepped for dissection. Around him, 3 automated tailoring drones whirred and chirped, their laser scanners mapping every inch of his frame with invasive thoroughness. Ida sat on a plush velvet divan a few meters away watching him. She had discarded her travel tunic and was now draped in a robe of shifting deep indigo. Mochi, the spherical drone, hovered at her shoulder like a loyal parrot. "Hold still," a robotic voice commanded from one of the tailoring drones, detecting excessive spinal tension. "Relax the trapezius muscles, or the jacket will hang like a shroud." Philip tried to relax. He failed. His shoulders were practically touching his ears. "I am relaxed," Philip gritted out. "This is my relaxed state. I am a maintenance engineer. We exist in a perpetual state of bracing for impact." Ida's hands moved. Mochi projected the text in the air, the letters glowing a soft amber. "You look like you are waiting for a hull breach. The fabric is empathic, Philip. If you are anxious, it will turn a sympathetic shade of nausea green. Please do not ruin the color palette." "Empathic fabric," Philip muttered, staring at the bolt of cloth the drone was holding. It shimmered like oil on water. "Of course. Because wearing clothes that judge your emotional stability is exactly what this day needed." Tessa was sitting next to Ida, kicking her legs. She was currently eating a packet of synthesized fruit gummies she had smuggled in. "Dad, you are vibrating. Even Mochi looks worried." Ida signed something rapid and sharp. Mochi flashed the translation. "She says do not spasm. It frightens the seamstresses." "Spasm." Philip looked at the drone. "I am not spasming. That is a mistranslation. Tell her I am displaying manly stoicism." Tessa choked on a gummy, laughing. "Dad, listen to the robot. Stop spasming." Philip exhaled, forcing his shoulders down. The tailoring drone chirped in approval and draped a swath of the empathic fabric over his chest. Immediately, the cloth settled, turning a deep, reassuring charcoal gray with faint veins of silver that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. "Better," the machine whirred. Ida stood up and walked over to him. The movement was so fluid it made Philip feel clumsy just watching her. She stopped at the edge of the pedestal. She was tall, her eyes level with his chin. Without the distance of the elevator, he could see the fine texture of her violet skin, the way the light caught the microscopic fur. She looked alien, yes, but in the proximity of the fitting room, she also just looked tired. She reached out. Philip flinched instinctively. Ida paused. Her ears flattened slightly. She didn't pull back. Instead, she slowly raised her hand and extended 2 fingers, her index and middle finger, and tapped them gently against the inside of her own wrist, right over her pulse point. She looked at him, then nodded at his hand. "What is this?" Philip asked. Mochi projected the answer. "This is how my people greet those we intend to trust. We do not shake hands. Grabbing a hand is aggressive. It restricts movement. We touch the pulse. We feel the life rhythm of the other. It is a gesture of vulnerability." Philip looked at her hand. It was an offer. A peace treaty in the middle of a war zone. He didn't understand. He slowly extended his arm. He felt foolish, his hand rough and calloused, from years of handling wrenches and hydrospanners hovering near her elegant, violet wrist. "Like this?" he asked. He touched her wrist with 2 fingers. The sensation was immediate. Her skin was warmer than a human's, and he could feel the strong, steady thrum of her pulse beneath his fingertips. It was a rapid beat, faster than his own. But what surprised him was the vibration that traveled back up his arm. It wasn't just a pulse, it was a resonance. Her vocal collar, the haptic device, was humming at a low frequency, creating a constant, subtle feedback loop. Ida closed her eyes for a second, leaning into the touch. Then she opened them and tapped his wrist in return. Her claws were sheathed, her touch soft but firm. Philip felt a strange jolt. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet. It was the sudden jarring realization of another person's reality. He realized then that Ida wasn't living in silence. She was living in a world of constant tactile information. She could feel the hum of the ventilation, the tread of boots on the floor, the heartbeat of the person standing next to her. She wasn't missing a sense. She was overwhelmed by one. He looked at her face. "It is loud for you, isn't it, the world?" Ida's eyes widened slightly. A look of genuine surprise crossed her face. She withdrew her hand and signed her movements softer now. "Most people think I am broken. They shout at me. They wave their hands. You are the first to ask if it is too loud." "I am an engineer," Philip said, stepping down from the pedestal as the drones finished their work. "I know that just because a machine isn't making noise doesn't mean it isn't running at maximum capacity." Ida stared at him for a beat longer than necessary. Then a small sound escaped her, a low, rhythmic chuffing noise. Her shoulders shook. Mochi helpfully supplied laughing. "She is laughing." "At me?" Philip asked, checking his empathic suit to make sure it hadn't turned pink. "With you," Mochi corrected. "She says you are surprisingly intuitive for a man who wears his utility belt to a formal fitting." Philip looked down. He was indeed still wearing his belt over the expensive charcoal suit. He unbuckled it with a sigh, handing it to a confused drone. "Fine, you win." The mirror room was designed to break egos. It was a hexagonal chamber, lined with floor-to-ceiling crystalline panes that reflected the occupant from infinite angles. It was intended to check the fit of the ceremonial garments, but mostly it served to force people to confront exactly who they were pretending to be. Philip stood in the center, looking at the infinite line of Philips stretching out into the distance. The suit fit perfectly. It made him look taller, broader. It hid the slump of exhaustion in his spine. He looked like a man who belonged in the upper ring. He looked like a man Viola would have stayed for. The thought tasted like bile. Ida stepped into the frame next to him. She wore a gown of liquid silver that adhered to zero-gravity formal standards, straps that defied physics fabric that floated as if underwater. She looked regal, dangerous. She caught his eye in the reflection. "Do not try to act," she signed. "A fake boyfriend who tries to be charming is obvious. A fake boyfriend who is just there, that is a mystery. People project their own assumptions onto silence. Just be solid. Be the wall I lean on." "I can do solid," Philip said. "I am good at being a load-bearing structure." His wrist was buzzed. He glanced down. The name on the screen made the infinite reflections seem to spin. "Sender Viola, subject regarding Tessa." Philip's breath hitched. He tapped the message open. "Philip Arden tells me you are on the list. I assume this is some sort of gesture. Please ensure Tessa is dressed appropriately. The theme is celestial harmony. It would be nice for us to appear as a mature family unit, even if just for the photo opportunity in the garden." "Don't make this difficult." Philip read it twice. Mature family unit. Photo opportunity. It wasn't a welcome. It was a direction. She wasn't speaking to a father. She was speaking to a contractor she had hired to manage a prop. She hasn't seen Tessa in 11 months, Philip said, his voice hollow. She missed her birthday. She missed the school play. And now she wants a mature family unit for the cameras. He felt a hand on his shoulder. Ida was reading the message over his arm. She stepped back, her face twisting in a look of impressive distaste. She signed rapidly, her fingers blurring. Mochi's text appeared in red, bold letters. She writes like she is submitting a grant application for a humanitarian award. Mature family unit. Does she want a receipt for your presence? Philip stared at the translation. Then he looked at Ida's disgusted expression. A bubble of laughter, unexpected and sharp, rose in his chest. He snorted. Then he chuckled. Then he was laughing properly, the kind of laugh that hurts because it is releasing too much pressure at once. A grant application, Philip wheezed. God, you are right. She probably has a tax code for us. Ida smirked, her whiskers twitching. Item 4B, ex-husband. Deductible. For the first time all day, Philip didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a co-conspirator. Okay, Philip said, wiping his eyes. Okay, let us go do this. For the tax deduction. The next 2 hours were a blur of simulated intimacy and security protocols. Montage sequence. The corridor to the security checkpoint was long and lined with biometric scanners. Ida walked ahead, her stride confident. Philip walked half a step behind her. Should I hold your hand? Philip asked. Ida didn't look back. She just reached out her left hand palm. Open fingers slightly curled. Philip took it. It wasn't awkward this time. He felt the hum of her pulse. He gave her hand a squeeze, 2 short pulses. I am here, she squeezed back. Roger that. They sat in a small waiting area, while Arden processed their clearance. Question, Philip whispered. How did we meet? Ida signed a salvage auction. You were bidding on an engine part. I was bidding on the navigation core from the same ship. We argued over who got the interface cables. Philip raised an eyebrow. Did I win? Ida gave him a flat look. I am currently wearing a dress that costs more than your shuttle. What do you think? Right, you won. I was charmed by your ruthless negotiation tactics. Correct. In a private alcove, they practiced the look. Look at me like you know a secret about me, Ida signed. Philip looked at her. He thought about the deafness, the vibrations, the way she used sarcasm as a shield. He thought about how she was walking into a lion's den to get back something that had been stolen from her. He didn't have to pretend to admire her. Like this? He asked. Ida stared at him. Her ears swiveled forward. She blinked, looking away for a second before signing. Yes, that is adequate. Try to blink occasionally. It is intense. By the time they reached the final airlock before the reception zone, the rhythm between them had shifted. They weren't strangers anymore. They were a team. A weird, mismatched interspecies team, but a team nonetheless. They found a quiet spot on the observation deck, while Tessa ran off to harass a vending machine with Mochi. The view outside was spectacular. The curvature of the earth, rising blue and white against the void, the stars burning like hard diamonds. Philip loosened the collar of his suit. You know I didn't hate her, Viola. Ida leaned against the railing, watching the stars. Hate is too much energy. Indifference is the real end. I am not indifferent, Philip admitted. I am just tired. It wasn't a big explosion. No shouting matches. No thrown vases. Just erosion. I was happy with the ground. She wanted the sky. Every day I felt like I was holding her down just by existing. Eventually I let go. He looked at his hands. I failed her, I know that. But I couldn't let her take Tessa up into the clouds and drop her. Viola forgets that gravity exists until she hits the ground. I am the one who packs the parachutes. Ida turned to him. The playfulness was gone from her face. She looked somber, her violet eyes dark. "My accident," she began, Mochi, projecting the text on the glass of the viewport. "It was not an explosion either. It was a test. I was a resonance engineer. We were testing a new sonic mining array. I told the supervisor the frequency was unstable. I told him it would create a feedback loop in the auditory cortex." Philip felt a chill. Viola. Viola was the project manager, Ida signed. She needed the data for a presentation. She overrode the safety lock. She said, "We need to push the boundaries." "I was in the chamber when the array fired." She touched her ears. "It didn't just break my hearing, Philip. It liquefied the cochlear nerves. It turned sound into pain. It took me 3 years to learn how to touch the world again without screaming." Philip stared at her, horror rising in his throat. "She did that to you, and you are going to her wedding." "She has the original data logs," Ida signed. "The black box from the test. She kept it, as leverage, to ensure I never sued the company. She calls it insurance. I call it my life." "The thing you need to retrieve," Philip realized. "It is the data. Yes. If I have that, I can prove negligence. I can get the settlement I need to pay for the neural regeneration surgery. It is experimental and it costs 5 million credits. I do not want revenge, Philip. I want my hearing back. I want to hear music again. I want to hear the rain." Philip looked at the woman standing next to him. She wasn't a predator. She was a survivor, clawing her way back to a sense she had lost because of someone else's ambition. "We are going to get it," Philip said. His voice was hard, the voice of the pilot who had once flown through magnetic storms. "I do not care about the wedding. We are getting that black box." Ida shook her head. "No heroics, please. If you try to be a hero, Viola will spot it. She eats heroes for breakfast. I just need you to be there. When I am near her, I panic. My senses overload. I need an anchor. I need someone to stand next to me so I do not dissolve." "An anchor," Philip repeated. "I can do anchor. I am heavy. I am stubborn." "You guys are doing it again," a voice chirped. Tessa was standing a few feet away, holding a bag of spicy chips. Her mouth was stained red. She was looking at them with a frown that was far too adult for her face. "Doing what?" Philip asked, stepping back from Ida. "Talking without talking," Tessa said. "You are fake dating, but you are having a real conversation. It is weird. The adults usually just lie to each other." She pointed a chip at Philip. "Mom used to talk to you, but she was always looking over your shoulder at the door. Ida looks at you." Philip and Ida froze. The silence stretched between them, heavy and significant. "Finish your chips, Tessa," Philip said, his voice gruff. "We have a rehearsal dinner to attend." The night cycle on the station was artificial, a dimming of the corridor lights to a soft amber. Philip had been given a guest suite in the lower levels of Sector 1, luxurious by his standards, barely adequate by the weddings. He was sitting on the edge of the bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The suit hung in the closet, a ghost of the man he was pretending to be. His personal maintenance tablet, a battered device he used for work diagnostics, beeped. It wasn't a standard notification. It was a localized override. Someone had tapped directly into the engineering frequency of his specific quarters. He picked it up. "Sender null ID channel, maintenance. Sublayer 04 message. The atmospheric mix in the conservatory is set to fluctuate at 1900 hours tomorrow. Do not let the broadcast happen. If the signal goes out, the lock engages." Philip frowned. He sat up, his engineer brain instantly awake. Atmospheric mix. The conservatory was a closed system. If the mix fluctuated during a broadcast, the safety protocols would seal the room to prevent contamination. "If the signal goes out, the lock engages," he whispered. Someone wasn't just warning him. Someone was telling him that the wedding was a trap. There was a soft chime at his door. Philip got up and opened it. Ida was standing there. She was wearing a simple silk robe, her face scrubbed clean of the metallic makeup she had worn earlier. She looked younger, more vulnerable. She held up her own device. It showed a similar message, but hers was coded in sonic frequencies, visualized as a waveform. "You got one too," she signed. "Someone knows we are here," Philip said, ushering her in and closing the door. "And someone knows about the conservatory systems. This isn't just about a wedding anymore, Ida." Ida looked at the message on his tablet. Her face hardened. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the sharp, feline intensity he had seen at the elevator. "Viola plans everything," she signed, her hands moving with grim precision. "But she never plans for the machinery to fight back. Whoever sent this, they are on our side. Or they want to burn the whole station down." 1900 hours, Philip said. "That is the exchange of vows." "Then we have until 1900 hours to find the black box," Ida signed. "Because once those doors lock, we are not guests. We are prisoners." Philip looked at her. He thought about Tessa sleeping in the next room. He thought about the 5,000 credits. He thought about the mature family unit. "Get some sleep," Philip said. "Tomorrow we are going to ruin a wedding." Ida nodded. She reached out and tapped his wrist 1-2. Philip tapped back. 1-2. She slipped out of the room, leaving Philip alone with the warning and the weight of the coming storm. He walked to the window and looked up at the upper ring, glowing like a halo against the dark. It looked beautiful. It looked like a trap. The entry to the glass conservatory was not so much a doorway, as it was a membrane between reality and theater. The air here was different, thinner, cooler, and scented with a genetically sequenced perfume that smelled of ozone and crushed lilies. Philip adjusted his collar. The empathic fabric of his suit was fighting a losing battle against his central nervous system. He could see the faint, treacherous bloom of nausea green, threatening to seep into the charcoal gray lapels. He forced a breath into his lungs, counting to 4, willing the fabric to return to a neutral, stoic slate. "Easy, Dad," Tessa whispered, tugging on the hem of his jacket. She looked uncomfortable in her own formal wear, a stiff dress of iridescent blue that crinkled when she moved. "You look like you are about to fix a toilet. Stand like a hero." "Heroes usually die in the first act, Tess," Philip muttered, but he straightened his spine. Ida stood between them, a pillar of liquid silver. Her dress did not just reflect the ambient light. It seemed to consume it and redistribute it as a soft lunar glow. Her ears were swiveled forward, alert, twitching, at frequencies Philip could not hear. Mochi hovered at her left shoulder, its white casing polished to a mirror shine projecting a low-profile status bar that currently read Ambient Noise Level High. Translation Matrix Active. They stepped through the archway and into the dome. The conservatory was a masterpiece of arrogance. It was a massive hemisphere of transparent aluminum, jutting out from the station's hull, offering a terrifyingly clear view of the cosmos. But for the wedding, the view had been curated. A layer of artificial mist clung to the floor, swirling around the ankles of the guests like dry ice. The lighting was not coming from the panels above, but from the guests themselves. Hundreds of people and non-people filled the space. There were the high-ranking human administrators in their bioluminescent sashes. There were the tall, slender Ethel Guardians with their crystalline exoskeletons refracting the starlight. Every guest wore a Lumalink, a small, glowing accessory that pulsed in synchronization with the wedding's atmospheric music. It was glittering. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. "Name." A voice cut through the ambient hum. Arden stood at the head of the receiving line. He held a datapad that looked more like a weapon than a guest list. His eyes, devoid of any biological warmth, scanned Philip from head to toe. It was a scan that registered the scuff on his left boot, the slightly outdated cut of his hair, and the way his hand hovered protectively near Tessa's shoulder. "Philip Marlowe," Philip said. "+1 and +2. Arden didn't look at the list. "We have you logged, Mr. Marlowe. The +1 has raised significant flags in this seeding algorithm." Arden's gaze shifted to Ida. For a second, the protocol butler's mask slipped, revealing a flicker of genuine confusion, mixed with distaste. A maintenance engineer bringing a deaf alien salvage worker to the wedding of the station director. It did not compute. It was a variable that ruined his perfect equation. Ida did not flinch. She stared Arden down, her golden eyes unblinking. She raised a hand, and Mochi projected a single line of text in the air, crisp and red. The invitation said guest. It did not specify species or auditory capacity. "Mark us, present Arden." Arden's jaw tightened. He tapped the pad. "Proceed. You are seated in Zone C, the obscured view." "Charming," Philip murmured as they moved past him into the swirling mist. They navigated the crowd. The atmosphere was tense, vibrating with the energy of 1,000 hushed conversations. Philip felt eyes on him, heavy, judgmental stares. He was the ex-husband, the failure, the man who grounded the bird that wanted to fly. And now, he was here walking through the mist with a woman who looked like she had been forged from starlight and silence. "Ignore them," Ida signed, her hand moving subtly against her dress. Mochi flashed the translation on Philip's peripheral vision glass. "They are not looking at your failures. They are looking at my dress. It is brighter than their future." Philip almost smiled. "You are enjoying this." "I am terrified," Ida signed, back her face remaining perfectly impassive. "But panic is a private event. Publicly, I am a queen." Then the music changed. It wasn't a melody, so much as a pressure change. The low thrum of the bass deepened, vibrating through the floor, shaking the mist. The guests fell silent, turning toward the northern apex of the dome. The lights dimmed, leaving only the starlight outside and the glowing luma-links of the guests. Viola appeared. She emerged from a lift at the far end of the garden, standing on a floating platform that drifted slowly over the heads of the crowd. Philip felt the breath leave his body. She was spectacular. There was no other word for it. She wore a gown made of woven fiber optics that pulsed with a soft heartbeat rhythm. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant style that accentuated the sharp lines of her face. The face he had kissed, the face he had argued with, the face he had watched turn away from him for the last time. She looked powerful. She looked complete. The platform lowered, depositing her at the end of the long crystalline aisle. She began to walk, her movements choreographed to the second. She smiled at the guests, a smile that was warm, but did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning, calculating, checking the angles for the cameras that floated invisibly in the air. Then she saw them. She saw Philip. She saw Tessa. And she saw Ida. Viola stopped. It was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds, but in the high-stakes theater of the wedding it was an eternity. The music seemed to hang in the air. The guests held their breath. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. Philip felt his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that he was sure echoed through the floorboards. "Don't look down," he told himself. "Don't look away." Viola broke the tableau. She didn't frown. She didn't glare. She widened her smile, adding 3 degrees of warmth that Philip knew were entirely synthetic. She altered her trajectory, moving away from the altar and coming straight toward them. The crowd parted like water. Viola stopped 3 feet in front of Philip. Up close, the fiber-optic dress hummed with a faint electrical buzz. She smelled of cold orchids. "Philip," she said. Her voice was modulated perfect for the microphones. "You actually came." "You invited us," Philip said. His voice sounded rough to his own ears, lacking the polish of the upper ring. I invited a lot of people, Viola said, her eyes flicking to Tessa. She reached out and smoothed a stray lock of hair from Tessa's forehead. Tessa stiffened, but didn't pull away. I didn't think you would bring company. Viola turned her gaze to Ida. It was a look of surgical appraisal. She looked at the ears. She looked at the vocal collar. She looked at the hand resting near Philip's arm. And this is, Viola asked. Ida could not hear the tone, but she could read the micro-expressions. She saw the condescension in the corner of Viola's mouth. She saw the challenge. Ida raised her hands. The movement was graceful, commanding. Mochi floated forward, projecting the text in a bold, assertive font between them. We are here to congratulate, not to ask for permission. The name is Ida. Viola read the text. A flicker of recognition passed behind her eyes, a memory of a lab, a test, a scream. But she buried it instantly under the bride's mask. Ida, Viola repeated, testing the name. Charmed. I hope you find the ceremony stimulating. The acoustics in here are designed for those with a refined palate. It was a low blow, a velvet knife. The tension in the air was so thick it could be cut with a laser cutter. The guests were leaning in hungry for the drama. Mom, Tessa said loudly. Viola blinked, looking down. You look pretty, Tessa said, her voice cutting through the sophisticated malice of the adults. Can I have cake? The invite said there would be cake. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It was nervous laughter, but it broke the standoff. Viola's smile faltered, then softened into something that looked almost real. Of course, Tess. After the vows, be patient. She looked at Philip one last time. Don't cause a scene, Philip. The universe is watching. I am just a guest, Philip said. I am just here to watch the show. Viola turned and walked back to the altar. The music swelled again, drowning out the murmur of the crowd. The ceremony began. It was a traditional station union, a blending of corporate merger and romantic theater. The groom, a high-ranking official from the Helium Syndicate named Julian, waited at the altar. He was handsome in a vague, generic way, like a stock photo of success. Philip doubted Julian knew the first thing about the woman walking toward him. As the officiant began the opening recitations, the floor began to vibrate. This was the resonance of union, a trendy ceremonial feature where the vows were spoken not just into the air, but transmitted as low-frequency sonic waves through the station's hull, allowing the guests to feel the commitment. For Philip, it was a mild buzzing in his boots. For Ida, it was an assault. Philip felt her sway. He looked down. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her ears flattened tight against her skull. The vibrations were overloading her sensitive tactile interface. The haptic collar around her neck was glowing a fierce, angry red as it tried to process the overwhelming input. She stumbled, her silver shoe slipping on the smooth glass floor. Without thinking, without calculating the optics or the politics, Philip moved. He stepped in close, turning his body to shield her from the cameras. He reached out and took her hand, but he didn't just hold it. He pressed his thumb firmly against the pulse point on her wrist, and with his other hand, he gripped her elbow, grounding her. Anchor, he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. He held her steady. He let his own body absorb the sway. He became the wall she had asked for. Ida's eyes snapped open. She looked at him, disoriented pupils dilated. She felt his grip steady, unmoving, a fixed point in a spinning world. She took a breath, then another. She tapped his wrist twice. I am here. Philip didn't let go. He kept his hand on her wrist, maintaining the connection. Across the room, standing at the altar, Viola turned to face the crowd for the exchange of rings. Her eyes swept over the audience. She saw them. She saw Philip holding the alien woman. She saw the way he shielded her. She saw the intimacy of the gesture, a protective, instinctive intimacy that she realized with a jolt of cold shock he had never shown her in the final years of their marriage. Her smile didn't drop, but her eyes darkened. It was a microscopic shift, a darkening of the iris that lasted less than half a second. But on the massive screens, projecting her face to the entire station, it was visible. Viola was calculating. The officiant droned on. "Do you, Viola, pledge your genetic and asset lineage to the House of Corrigan?" "I do," Viola said. At that exact moment, Mochi spasmed. The white drone hovering faithfully by Ida's shoulder suddenly dipped in the air. Its projector flickered. The subtitles, which had been translating the vows, dissolved into a garbled mess of syntax errors and raw code. UNIONERRORSYSTEMOVERLOAD. Ida frowned, tapping the drone. It didn't respond. It spun lazily, its gyroscope failing. Philip felt a pop in his ears. It was the sensation of a rapid altitude change, the kind you feel when a shuttle drops too fast. He swallowed, trying to clear the pressure, but it wouldn't clear. He sniffed the air. Beneath the scent of lilies and perfume, there was something else. Sharp, metallic, ozone. And the faint, distinct smell of scorched, recycled air. Philip's head snapped up. He looked at the ventilation ducts running along the spine of the dome. The air shimmered around them. "The frequency," Philip whispered. "The resonance of union." The bass vibration wasn't just shaking the floor. It was hitting the resonant frequency of the atmospheric pressure regulators. "Dad," Tessa tugged his hand. "My ears hurt." Ida grabbed Philip's arm. Her grip was like iron. Her claws extended, slightly pricking the fabric of his suit. She signed rapidly, abandoning all grace. "The vibration. It is not music. It is a jamming signal. It is overriding the local network." Philip looked at his wristcom. No signal. He looked at the guests. They were starting to rub their temples, looking around in confusion. The music was getting louder, a throbbing pulse that felt like it was squeezing the brain. Ida pointed to the exits. The LED strips, running along the floor, guiding the way to the emergency airlocks, flickered from a welcoming blue to a hard warning red. "Locked," Ida signed. "Someone is using the ritual frequency to trigger a containment lockdown." Philip looked at the altar. Viola was still standing there. She was holding the groom's hands. She looked serene. She looked prepared. But Arden, standing in the shadows behind the officiant, took a single step back. He tapped his earpiece, his face grim. He knew. "This isn't a glitch," Philip said, his voice hard. "It is a cage." He looked around the beautiful glittering dome. The mist was rising higher, obscuring the floor. The guests were the audience, and they were trapped in the set. "And now," the officiant said, his voice booming over the speakers, amplified by the throbbing bass, "we share this moment with the galaxy." The massive screens behind the altar shifted. The image of the happy couple was replaced by a complex rotating graphic of the station, and then a live feed of the conservatory itself from a high angle. A disembodied voice, smooth and artificial, echoed through the dome. "Broadcasting live to all residential sectors. The signal is locked. The doors are sealed. Witness the union." The doors to the conservatory slammed shut with a heavy, final thud that cut through the music. The magnetic locks engaged with a screech of metal on metal. Panic rippled through the crowd. A woman screamed. A glass shattered. Philip pulled Tessa against his side. He looked at Ida. "The black box," Philip said. "Where is it?" Ida looked at Viola, who was now standing alone at the altar, the groom looking confused beside her. "She is wearing it," Ida signed, her eyes locked on the fiber-optic dress. "It is the power source for her gown." Philip looked at the woman who had once been his wife, glowing like a sun in the center of a trapped room. She held the key to Ida's life, and she had just locked them all inside with her. "Well," Philip said, unbuttoning his jacket to give himself range of motion, "I guess the wedding is over." The reception began with the deceptive glitter of a diamond crushing into coal. Waiters drifted through the mist carrying trays of nebula nectar, a cocktail that glowed with a bioluminescent blue pulse, synchronized to the ambient music. The liquid swirled in the glasses, looking less like a beverage and more like a captured spirit. The guests, initially shaken by the locking of the doors, had been soothed by the smooth, disembodied voice of the station announcer, assuring them that the ceiling of the dome was merely part of the immersive celestial experience. They drank the glowing blue lies. They laughed, the sound brittle and sharp against the glass walls. Philip stood near the edge of the circular dance floor, his eyes scanning the perimeter. His engineer's senses were screaming louder than the bass dropping through the floorboards. It was not just the locked doors. It was the taste of the air. The ventilation in the glass conservatory was usually crisp, recycled, to a perfect mix of 21% oxygen and 79% nitrogen scrubbed of all particulate matter. But now, the air tasted flat. It sat heavy in the lungs, requiring a conscious effort to inhale deep enough to satisfy the blood's demand. "The partial pressure is dropping," Philip murmured to himself. He checked his wrist chronometer. It had been 12 minutes since the doors sealed. "They are throttling the intake fans, or the scrubbers are saturated." Beside him, Ida stood rigid. She was not watching the guests. She was watching the floor. Her ears were swiveled back, pressing against her skull to dampen the relentless vibration of the music. To her, the reception was not a party. It was a physical assault. The bass notes were tectonic plates, shifting beneath her feet, jarring her skeletal structure with every beat. She reached out and gripped Philip's sleeve. Her claws were slightly extended, snagging the empathic fabric which had turned a bruised, anxious purple. She signed her movements sharp and abbreviated. Mochi, hovering bravely despite its earlier glitch, projected the red text low to the ground to avoid drawing attention. "The floor is lying. The rhythm is wrong. People are stumbling, but not from the alcohol." Philip looked at the dance floor. A tall avian diplomat was swaying his feathers, puffed out in a distress display that the other guests mistook for enthusiasm. A human woman, in a sequined gown, laughed, then abruptly sat down on the floor, hand to her forehead. "Hypoxia," Philip diagnosed, his stomach twisting. "Mild for now. But if the mix does not adjust in 20 minutes, we are going to see mass fainting. In 40 minutes, brain damage." He looked down at Tessa. She was standing pressed against his leg, clutching her juice pouch like a lifeline. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide, darting around the room at the adults, who were acting increasingly erratic. "Dad," Tessa whispered. Her voice was small, stripped of its usual precocious snark. "I feel weird. My head feels like a balloon." Philip dropped to one knee, instantly bringing his face level with hers. He put his hands on her shoulders, feeling the slight tremor in her small frame. "Listen to me, Tess," Philip said, keeping his voice steady, the voice he used when the shuttle engines stalled in mid-orbit. "The air is a little thin. It is like when we go hiking in the upper ring gardens. You need to breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 4. Tessa nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I am sorry, Dad." "Sorry for what?" "For the text." She sniffed a tear, escaping and tracking through the glitter on her cheek. "I just wanted us to have the money. I wanted you to stop looking at the bills with that scary quiet face. I didn't know it would be a trap. I didn't know Mom would be—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the betrayal she felt. Philip felt a crack in his heart, wide enough to swallow the entire station. He pulled her into a hug, squeezing her tight. "Hey," he said into her hair. "Look at me." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You made a call," Philip said, a small, crooked smile touching his lips. "It was a bold call, a high-risk maneuver. I respect the ambition." Tessa gave a watery giggle. "But next time," Philip continued, wiping the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Next time you decide to sell me to an alien stranger for a wedding date, You text no. Or at least, please send a warning emoji. A skull and crossbones would have been nice. Maybe a little ghost. Tessa laughed a real sound this time. Okay, next time I will use the poop emoji. Deal, Philip said. He stood up, the playfulness vanishing from his eyes as he looked at Ida. We need to move. The CO2 levels are climbing. If we stay in the main hall, we pass out with the rest of them. Ida nodded. She scanned the room, her golden eyes dissecting the layout of the conservatory, not as a guest, but as a predator looking for an escape route. She pointed to a discreet panel, disguised as a wall of ivy, near the catering station. Service access, she signed. It leads to the sublayer cooling tunnels. From there, we can reach the auxiliary control room. Philip blinked. How do you know that? Ida looked at him. A flicker of something dry and cynical crossed her face. I did not come here hoping to get lucky, Philip. I bought the blueprints of this dome 3 weeks ago from a black market surveyor. I knew every exit before I put this dress on. Philip stared at her. He had underestimated her. Again. He had thought she was a victim seeking closure. She was an operative executing a mission. You are scary, Philip said, meaning it as a compliment. Lead the way. They moved through the crowd, Philip keeping a hand on Tessa's shoulder, Ida cutting through the mist like a silver prow. The guests were too intoxicated by the thin air and the flashing lights to notice the trio moving against the flow of traffic. They reached the wall of ivy. Ida reached into the foliage, her fingers finding the hidden release latch, with practiced ease. Going somewhere. The voice was polite, cultured and cold as liquid nitrogen. Philip froze. He turned slowly. Arden stood there. The protocol butler looked entirely unaffected by the thinning air, likely because his cybernetic augmentations were regulating his oxygen uptake. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, blocking their path with the immovability of a blast door. The reception is being filmed, Arden said, tapping his data pad. The narrative requires all guests to be present for the first toast. Leaving the frame disrupts the visual symmetry. The narrative is going to be a snuff film if you don't open the vents, Philip snapped, stepping forward. Look at them, Arden. The oxygen saturation is dropping below 80%. People are going to start dropping. Arden glanced at the crowd. The atmosphere is being managed to induce a state of euphoria and compliance. It is within safety tolerances. Whose safety? Philip demanded. Yours or the guests, Mr. Marlowe. Arden said, his tone dropping an octave. Please return to your designated zone. Resistance will force security to categorize you as a disruptive element. Ida stepped forward, her claws, fully extended, now tearing through the silk of her gloves. She was done with etiquette. But before she could move, the crowd parted again. Viola approached. She did not walk. She glided. The fiber-optic dress was now shifting colors, moving from pristine white to a soft, dangerous crimson that matched the warning lights on the floor. She looked radiant, energized by the very atmosphere that was suffocating everyone else. She stopped 5 feet from them. She looked at Philip, then at the ivy wall, then back at Philip. Running away? Viola asked. Her voice was sweet, sticky like syrup. You always did run when things got complicated, Philip. I am not running, Philip said, his voice hard. I am trying to keep our daughter from suffocating. Or did you forget she breathes oxygen? Viola sighed a sound of theatrical disappointment. You are being dramatic. The air is fine. It is just a little thin to heighten the senses, to make the music feel deeper. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. She reached out and touched his lapel, her fingers lingering on the empathic fabric. Philip, she whispered, low enough that only he could hear. Don't ruin this. Don't make a scene. Do it for Tessa. If you disrupt the broadcast, if you humiliate me, think about what that does to her future. I can open doors for her, Philip. Or I can close them forever. It was the same argument she had used 5 years ago. Do it for the family. Do it for the future. Swallow your pride, swallow your principles, and just smile for the camera. For a moment, Philip wavered. The habit of capitulation was strong. He looked at Tessa, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. He wanted to protect her. He wanted her to be safe. And the easiest way to keep her safe was to obey. Then he looked at Ida. She was watching him, her hand hovering over her heart. She wasn't judging him. She was waiting to see if the man she had hired was real or just another projection. Philip looked back at Viola. He saw the calculation in her eyes. He saw the way she looked at Tessa, not as a child, but as a poker chip. He took a step back, breaking Viola's touch. He brushed his lapel as if removing dust. "You are right, Viola," Philip said, his voice ringing clear in the muffled room. "I should do it for Tessa." Viola smiled, a triumphant curling of her lips. "Good. I knew you were reasonable." "That is why I'm not staying," Philip finished. Viola's smile froze. "Excuse me." "Because of Tessa," Philip said, loud enough for Arden to hear, loud enough for the nearby guests to turn their heads. "Because she is watching me. And if I stand here and let you suffocate these people for a TV rating, I am teaching her that power matters more than people. I am teaching her that being safe is more important than being right." He grabbed Tessa's hand. He grabbed Ida's hand. "I am not standing still, Viola. Not anymore." "Arden," Viola snapped the mask, shattering. "Seize them!" But Ida was faster. She didn't attack. She pulled a small, spherical object from the folds of her dress, a sonic emitter she had salvaged from her kit. She tossed it at Arden's feet. It didn't explode. It screamed. A pulse of high-frequency sound, designed to overload cybernetic audio receptors, blasted outward. Arden clamped his hands over his ears, staggering back as his equilibrium sensors scrambled. The guests nearby flinched, but their organic ears merely rang. "Go!" Ida signaled. Philip kicked the hidden latch on the ivy wall. The panel sprang open, revealing a dark, narrow service corridor smelling of coolant and grease. He shoved Tessa inside, pulled Ida after her, and dove in himself, slamming the panel shut just as Arden recovered his balance. The silence in the service corridor was sudden and absolute. The thumping bass of the wedding was reduced to a dull throb in the walls. The air here was cooler, stale, but fully oxygenated. Philip took a deep, greedy breath, his head spinning as the oxygen hit his bloodstream. "Move!" Ida signed, her face grim. "He will override the lock in 2 minutes." Mochi projected a holographic map onto the mist that lingered in the damp corridor. It looked like a tangled web of blue lines. "We are in the tertiary cooling ducts," Mochi displayed. "The auxiliary control node is 3 levels down. We have to climb." "Climb!" Philip looked at the vertical ladder stretching down into the darkness. "In a tuxedo." "Better than dying in a tuxedo," Tessa said, her voice shaky but recovering. She grabbed the rungs and started down without hesitation. She was a station kid. She had been climbing maintenance ladders since she could walk. Philip followed, with Ida bringing up the rear. The descent was a nightmare of claustrophobia. The shaft was narrow, lit only by the emergency strips running along the conduit pipes. Philip could hear the hiss of the hydraulic fluid moving through the walls, the lifeblood of the station. "She is insane," Philip gasped, as they reached a landing platform halfway down. "She is actually suffocating her own guests." Ida dropped down beside him, her silver dress smudged with grease, her breathing heavy. "She does not see them as guests," Ida signed, her hands moving frantically. "She sees them as pixels. If they faint, it is drama. If they die, it is tragedy. Both sell ad space." She looked at Philip, her eyes fierce in the gloom. "Viola is a master of the narrative, Philip. She rewrites reality. When I warned her about the sonic test that deafened me, she didn't just ignore me. She convinced the review board that I was the one who was negligent. She turned me into the villain of my own injury. She makes you feel like you are the one who is crazy for noticing the room is on fire. Philip leaned against the cold metal wall, wiping sweat from his forehead. The truth of it hit him hard. She did that to me too, he admitted quietly. Not with safety tests, but with life. Every time I said we didn't have the money for a new apartment, she made me feel like I was punishing her. Every time I said I wanted to fly rescue instead of corporate transport, she made me feel like I was abandoning the family. He looked at Tessa, who was waiting at the next ladder watching them. I thought about going back, Philip confessed the words, tumbling out in the darkness. When she sent that text today, for a second, just a second, I thought, maybe I can fix it. Maybe if I just play the part right this time, if I smile enough, if I make enough money, maybe I can make Tessa's family whole again. Ida reached out. She placed her hand flat against his chest, right over his heart. She didn't tap this time. She just held it there, feeling the heavy, rapid thud of his anxiety. Philip, she signed with her free hand. A broken bone that heals crooked is not whole. It is just a deformity that hurts every time it rains. You cannot fix what refuses to be real. Philip covered her hand with his own. Her skin was warm, vibrating slightly with the hum of her collar. I know, he said. I know that now. Enough isn't about having the perfect picture. It is about not having to hold your breath to survive. Guys, Tessa hissed from the ladder. Emotional breakthrough later. Bad guys coming now. Above them, the hatch they had entered through clanged open. A beam of light sliced down the shaft. Target located, Arden's voice echoed down, distorted by the acoustics. Go, Philip shouted. They slid down the remaining ladders, landing in the sublayer control node. It was a small, circular room filled with blinking server racks and manual override wheels. In the center was the atmospheric regulation console. Philip rushed to it. The screen was flashing red. Alert, external override active. Oxygen mix, 72%. I can bypass it, Philip said, cracking his knuckles. I know this system. It is a standard Class 4 life support grid. He typed furiously, his fingers flying over the haptic keys. Bypassing the remote lock. Rerouting power to the scrubbers. Come on, come on. The screen beeped. Access denied. Biometric lock active. Authorization required V. Vance. Philip slammed his fist on the console. It is biolocked. It is keyed to her specific genetic signature. I cannot hack this. Not without hours of code breaking. We do not have hours, Ida said. She was watching the pressure gauge. We have 6 minutes before the elderly guests go into cardiac arrest. We need her, Philip said, turning around. We need Viola. She is up there? Tessa pointed to the ceiling. Locked in the dome. No, Philip said, his mind racing. She is not just up there. She is the lock. Her dress, Ida, you said her dress was the power source for the black box. Yes. It is a closed circuit. The dress is also a transmitter, Philip realized. She is broadcasting the signal from her body. That is why the lock is active. As long as she is wearing that dress, she controls the room. So we need to take the dress off her? Tessa asked. That seems difficult. No, Philip said. We do not need to take it off. We need to short it out. We need to disrupt the signal she is sending to the lock. He looked at Ida. Your salvage kit. The sonic emitter you threw at Arden. Do you have another one? Ida shook her head. That was the only one. But you have the collar, Philip said, looking at the device around her neck. It is a haptic resonance engine. It takes sound and converts it to vibration. Can it do the opposite? Can it take a vibration and amplify it into a disruption pulse? Ida touched her collar. Her eyes widened. It would burn out the core, she signed. It would destroy the device. I would be deaf again. Completely deaf. No vibration. No touch sound. Just silence. Philip froze. He looked at her. He knew what that device meant to her. It was her connection to the world. It was the only way she could hear her own laughter, or the beat of music, or the sound of his voice through her skin. "Ida," Philip said softly, "I cannot ask you to do that." The door to the control room shuddered. Arden was pounding on it from the other side. Ida looked at the console. She looked at the red numbers counting down the oxygen levels. She looked at Tessa, who was starting to wheeze slightly in the stale air. Then she looked at Philip. She stepped closer to him. She placed both hands on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heart, the sturdy, terrified, wonderful rhythm of it. She signed one question. "Do you trust me?" It wasn't a question about the plan. It was a question about them, about whether he saw her as a broken thing to be fixed, or a partner to be relied on. Philip didn't hesitate. He placed his hands over hers. "I want to trust you," he said. "I do trust you." Ida nodded. A small, sad smile touched her lips. She reached up and unlatched the safety protocols on her collar. The lights on the device shifted from a soft blue to a volatile, pulsing white. "Then hold on," she signed, "because this is going to be loud." She didn't wait for permission. She turned to the console. She pressed the amplification node of her collar directly against the biometric sensor pad. She closed her eyes and screamed. She didn't use her voice. She used the collar. She fed the feedback loop of the station's own vibration, the music, the machinery. The pounding of Arden on the door into the collar amplified it 1,000 times and fired it directly into the lock. A high-pitched whine filled the room, shattering the glass cover of the emergency fire axe on the wall. Philip covered Tessa's ears. The console sparked. Smoke poured from the sensor pad. Ida cried out a silent visual of pain as the collar flared bright white and then died, turning a dull, lifeless gray. The screen flickered. Biometric error. "System. Reset. Manual override enabled." Philip lunged for the controls. He slammed the open command on the ventilation shafts and the unlock command on the doors. A massive groan echoed through the station's hull. The sound of air rushing into the conservatory was audible, even 3 levels down. "It worked," Philip breathed. He turned to Ida. She was slumped against the console, her hand clutching the dead collar. She looked up at him. Her eyes were panicked. She tapped her wrist frantically, then tapped the console, then the floor. She couldn't feel anything. The feedback had burned out her tactile nerves temporarily, or the collar was dead. She was in the void. Philip fell to his knees beside her. He grabbed her hands. He squeezed them hard, harder than necessary, trying to push the sensation through the numbness. He pressed her hand to his throat and spoke, shouting the vibrations into her palm. "I am here. We are okay." Ida stared at him. Slowly, faintly she nodded. She could feel a ghost of a tremor. "We need to go," Tessa said, pulling at Philip's shirt. "Arden stopped banging. That means he is coming in." Philip helped Ida stand. She was unsteady, her balance compromised without her sonic anchor. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her tight against his side. "We are going back up," Philip said. "We are going to finish this." They scrambled out of the service hatch, not back into the vents, but into the main service elevator that led directly to the conservatory stage. Philip hit the button. The elevator rose. "Prepare yourselves," Philip said, adjusting his ruined suit. "Viola isn't going to be happy." The doors opened. They stepped out onto the stage of the glass conservatory, right behind the altar, where Viola had been standing. The stage of the glass conservatory felt less like a wedding platform, and more like the deck of a sinking ship. The air was still turbulent, swirling with the violence of the emergency vents Philip had forced open, but the atmosphere remained heavy with something far more toxic than carbon dioxide. The massive screen above them froze, Philip's face in a jagged, pixelated snarl, a digital lie projected 30 feet high. The red-captioned terrorist threat pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, casting a bloody light over the terrified guests. Viola stood center stage. Her fiber-optic dress, once a masterpiece of synchronized light, was now glitching. It stuttered between pristine white and the harsh crimson of the emergency alarms, betraying the chaos in her own system. She held the microphone like a weapon, her knuckles white. Philip stood 10 feet away, grease-stained chest heaving, with his arm wrapped protectively around Ida. He could feel the tremors running through Ida's body, not from fear, but from the neurological aftershocks of the sonic overload she had triggered. She was completely cut off now. No vibration, no sound, just a visual chaos she had to decipher frame by frame. "Security is en route," Viola announced, her voice projected to every corner of the dome. "Please remain calm. These saboteurs will be removed shortly." She lowered the microphone and took a step toward Philip. She moved into his personal space close enough that the camera drones hovering overhead would only see a concerned bride speaking to her troubled ex-husband. "You always liked being the hero, Philip," she whispered. Her voice was low, a soft hiss, meant only for him. "But you forget the first rule of heroism. The hero has to die for the story to work. Good people are just assets, Philip. And you are about to be spent." Philip looked at her. For years, this proximity would have paralyzed him. He would have scrambled to explain, to apologize, to fix whatever version of reality she had decided was broken. But the lack of oxygen had stripped away his patience, and the adrenaline had burned away his hesitation. He saw the sweat beading on her hairline. He saw the frantic dart of her eyes toward the side exits. "You are not afraid of me," Philip said, his voice flat, ignoring the microphone she tried to shove near his face. "You are afraid because the script broke." Viola's smile tightened at the corners. "I am writing the script, darling. And in this version, you are the bitter ex who tried to suffocate my happy ending." Ida stepped forward. She couldn't hear the words, but she read the posture. She saw the tilt of Viola's head, the condescension in the set of her shoulders. Ida's golden eyes were hard-focused and terrifyingly clear. She raised her hands. Her movements were slightly sluggish, the grace dampened by exhaustion, but the meaning was sharp. "Mochi." The drone sputtered back to life near her shoulder. Its casing was scorched, and it listed to the left, but the projection lens flickered on. The text appeared in the air, jagged and static-filled but legible. "Unlock the pressure regulators. Now. The manual override I triggered is temporary. The system will reset to your biometric lock in 90 seconds. Viola laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that echoed horribly in the tense silence. She looked at Ida with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You give orders as if you still have currency here," Viola said, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Look at you. You are a broken piece of equipment. You broke yourself trying to ruin my day, and for what jealousy," she played to the crowd, gesturing at Ida's ruined dress and the dead collar in her hand. "She is unstable," Viola cried out to the guests. "She is a stalker who has been harassing our family for years," the crowd murmured. Doubt rippled through the room. They were scared, confused, and looking for someone to blame. Viola was giving them a target. Philip felt Tessa shrink behind his legs. He felt the weight of the accusation settling on them. He knew he couldn't win an emotional argument with Viola. She could outcry out, scream, and outperform him every time. So he didn't try. He gently moved Tessa to stand directly behind him. He stepped away from Ida, creating a distinct, physical space between them and Viola. He looked at the camera drone hovering 6 feet away. He didn't look at it with anger. He looked at it with the bored, meticulous expression of a senior engineer inspecting a faulty circuit breaker. "I am not here to discuss my feelings, Viola," Philip said. His voice was calm, projecting the dad voice that cut through nonsense. "I am here to discuss the laws of thermodynamics." Viola blinked. This wasn't the line she expected. Philip pointed to the ventilation grids above. "The atmospheric scrubbers in this dome are rated for a maximum occupancy of 400 carbon-based life forms," Philip stated, reciting the specs he had memorized from the station manual years ago. You have 600 guests. You close the passive intake vents to create a mood. Then you overlaid a sonic frequency that sits exactly at 18 hertz. He turned to the crowd, ignoring Viola. 18 hertz is not music, Philip said to the guests. It is the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. It causes hallucinations. It induces panic. And more importantly, it disrupts the solenoids in the air recyclers. He turned back to Viola. You didn't just lock the doors, Viola. You created a gas chamber. And right now the CO2 levels are at 4%. In 10 minutes, people stop having headaches and start having seizures. If you do not open the main outflow, you are not a victim. You are a negligent homicide suspect. It was the one thing Viola hated, more than anything boring, unassailable, technical truth. You could spin a narrative, but you couldn't spin math. A hush fell over the room. A guest in the second row, a doctor from the medical wing, checked his smartwatch. He looked up, his face pale. "He is right," the doctor shouted. "My monitor reads high toxicity. The air is bad." Viola's mask cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Her eyes darted to the doctor, then back to Philip. She had lost the room's absolute trust. "He is lying," Viola snapped, her voice losing its melodic quality. "He sabotaged it, that is why. He knows the specs." She turned to the camera, desperation creeping in. "He infiltrated the technical bay, I saw him." "Yeah, about that," a small voice piped up. Tessa stepped out from behind Philip. She looked tiny on the big stage. Her blue dress was rumpled, her hair a mess. She held her personal comm unit in both hands, her thumbs hovering over the screen. "Tessa," Viola said, her voice turning instantly into a sugary threat. "Sweetheart, put the toy away. Come to Mommy." Tessa didn't move. She didn't look at Viola with love. She looked at her with the crushing disappointment of a child who has finally realized the monster under the bed is just a person in a costume. "I am not going anywhere," Tessa said, her voice shaking but loud. "And it is not a toy. It is a mirrored log." She tapped the screen. She swiped up a gesture practiced 1,000 times. "I synced my account with yours last month," Tessa said, "because you never answered my texts. I wanted to see if you were actually busy or just ignoring me." A gasp went through the crowd. "I have the log," Tessa continued. "Outgoing message, timestamp 8:14 this morning. Recipient Arden." She held the device up to the nearest camera drone. The screen was small, but the projection on the massive wall behind them was 40 feet high. Everyone saw it. To Arden Protocol, Chief from Viola Vance, instruction engage Maglock Alpha at 19:00. Override safety sensors. I want them trapped until the broadcast ends. If the air gets thin, let them faint. It makes for better drama. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. "Let them faint," someone whispered in the back. Viola stared at the giant screen. She stared at her own words, magnified, undeniable. Her face, drained of color, not from fear of the law, but from the sudden violent realization that her control had been shattered by the one person she deemed insignificant. "Tessa," Viola choked out. "That is out of context. That is a fabrication. It is on the blockchain, Mom," Tessa said, delivering the final blow with the brutal honesty of the digital generation. "You cannot edit it." The crowd erupted. It wasn't a roar. It was a chaotic wave of noise. People were shouting, pointing, recording. The social media feed on the side of the main screen began to scroll so fast, it was a blur of angry emojis and demands for arrests. Viola staggered back. She looked at the guests she had cultivated, the admirers she had groomed. They were all looking at her like she was something rotten. But the danger wasn't over. The lights in the dome flickered. The emergency override Philip had triggered gave a warning groan. "System, reset in 10 seconds," the automated voice announced. Re-engaging biometric lock. The dress, Philip shouted. Ida was already moving. She couldn't hear the countdown, but she could feel the shift in the floor plates as the magnetic locks prepared to slam home again. She didn't need sound. She had spent a lifetime reading the vibrations of machines. She scanned the stage. She scanned the floor. Then, she scanned Viola. Ida's eyes narrowed. She dropped to her knees and placed her palms flat on the glass stage floor. She closed her eyes. She ignored the shouting. She ignored the chaos. She focused on the thrum. The residual energy of the jamming signal. It was faint, fading, but it had a source. It wasn't the dress. Ida's eyes snapped open. She looked at the bouquet of crystalline flowers Viola had dropped when Tessa revealed the text. The flowers were humming. Ida scrambled forward on her hands and knees. She grabbed the bouquet. She ripped apart the silk wrapping at the base. There nestled among the stems was a small, black pulse emitter. The black box. The device Viola had stolen from Ida years ago, now repurposed to control the wedding trap. Ida held it up. She looked at Philip and smashed the device onto the glass floor. She raised her boot, a silver heel, scuffed from the climb, and brought it down. Crunch. The emitter shattered. Instantly, the red emergency lights turned a soothing, solid green. Lockdown overridden, the voice announced. Normal atmospheric cycle restored. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room as fresh, cool air blasted from every vent at full power. Ida stood there breathing hard, standing over the wreckage of the device that had ruined her life and then saved it. Viola stood alone. The groom Julian had quietly stepped away from her, disappearing into the crowd. Arden was nowhere to be seen. Viola looked at Philip. Her eyes were wet, but there was no softness in them. There was only the sharp, cold edge of a blade that has struck stone and shattered. "You ruined it," she whispered. "You ruin everything you touch, Philip. You are small. You were always too small for me." Philip looked at her. He looked at the woman who had haunted his sense of self-worth for half a decade. He looked at the power she wielded, which was now evaporating like mist. He walked over to her. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. "I am small," Philip agreed. "I am just a maintenance guy. I fix things. And today, I fixed your mistake." He reached back and took Tessa's hand. "Tessa isn't an accessory, Viola. She isn't a prop for your mature family unit photo. She is the reason I wake up. She is the reason I don't give up." He paused, looking straight into Viola's tear-filled eyes. "Tessa is not the reason I would ever come back to you. Tessa is the reason I finally learned how to live without you." Viola flinched. It was the first time he had ever rejected her. Not passively, not by failure, but by choice. Philip turned his back on her. "Let us go home," he said to Tessa and Ida. They walked off the stage, leaving Viola standing alone in the center of her shattered, perfect wedding while the cameras continued to roll, broadcasting her silence to the stars. They found a quiet corner in the orbital gardens outside the conservatory. The air here was sweet and real, smelling of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine. Ida sat on a stone bench, her head in her hands. Mochi was hovering low, running a self-repair diagnostic. Philip sat beside her. He didn't speak immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of nutrient gel he kept for work shifts. He nudged her elbow. Ida looked up. She looked exhausted, her violet skin pale. She took the gel with a nod of thanks. She tapped her ear, then shook her head. Still nothing. Philip pulled out his datapad. He typed slowly. "You were amazing. You saved everyone." Ida read the screen. She gave a weak, tired smile. She took the pad from him and typed, "I didn't save them. I just broke the lock. You stood up to her. That was the harder part." Philip chuckled a dry sound. "I just quoted a manual. It is not exactly poetry." Ida looked at him. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Then she typed again. There is something you need to know. The plot twist. Philip frowned. What plot twist? The bomb in the flowers. Ida shook her head. She typed rapidly. I told you I needed a date for my ex's wedding. I never said his name. I never said he. Philip stared at the words. He read them again. Ex's wedding. Never said he. He looked at Ida. Then he looked back at the conservatory, where Viola was currently being questioned by station security. Viola, Philip whispered. Ida nodded. She typed again. We were together for 2 years before she met you. We were partners in the lab and more. She hid me. She said it was bad for her career to be seen with a non-human salvage worker. She wanted someone respectable, someone safe. Philip felt his brain doing a somersault. She found you, Ida typed. The pilot, the hero, the human. She left me for you, Philip, and then she broke you too. Philip sat back on the bench, staring up at the artificial stars. The irony was so dense, it had its own gravity field. I was the fake boyfriend, Philip said, his voice full of wonder. At my ex-wife's wedding to her ex-girlfriend's ex-lover. He started to laugh. It was a hysterical, disbelief-filled laugh. We are a circle, Philip said, rubbing his face. A terrible dysfunctional geometry equation. Ida watched him laugh. She couldn't hear it, but she saw his shoulders shaking, the tension leaving his body. She reached out and touched his knee. I wanted you to see, she typed. I wanted you to see that she didn't leave you because you weren't enough. She leaves everyone, Philip. She consumes people. You were just the next course. Philip looked at her. He saw the pain she had carried, the silence she had endured, all to prove a point to him, a stranger. Thank you, Philip signed. It was clumsy, his fingers stiff, but he made the sign for thank you. He had learned from a safety video. Ida smiled, a real smile. Tessa, who had been sitting on the grass counting her sticker collection, stood up and walked over. She looked at Philip, her face serious. Dad, she said. Yeah, Tess. I have a confession, she said. She kicked at the grass. I didn't press yes by mistake. Philip froze. What? I know how to use a touchscreen, Dad. I am 10, not ancient, she said, rolling her eyes. I saw the message, I saw Ida's profile, and I saw you. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce and wet. You have been so sad. For 5 years. You just work and sleep and look at old photos. I saw you getting ready to just fade away. I didn't want you to fade. She pointed at the conservatory. I saw you were getting pulled back into her orbit. I knew if I didn't do something big, you would just drift. So I hit yes. I wanted to force you to do something crazy. Philip looked at his daughter. He saw the intelligence, the love, and the terrifying perceptiveness in her eyes. He felt a surge of emotion that made his throat tight. He wanted to scold her for the risk, for the danger. But he couldn't. She had saved him. In every way, a person could be saved. He reached out and pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her shoulder. You are grounded, Philip mumbled into her dress. For 20 years. Okay, Tessa said, hugging him back. And next time, Philip said, pulling back and looking at her. Warn me with an emoji, please. Deal, Tessa grinned. Philip stood up. He felt lighter than he had in a decade. The weight of Viola, of his failure of the past, it was gone. Left behind in the toxic air of the dome. He turned to Ida. She was standing now, watching them. She looked uncertain. The mission was over. The contract was fulfilled. She was deaf again, tired, and standing in a garden with a man she had hired for a day. She slowly raised her hand. She extended her 2 fingers, index and middle, and touched them lightly to Philip's wrist. It was the question she had taught him. Can I stand here? Is there space for me? Philip looked at her hand on his wrist. He looked at the scars on her fingers from her salvage work. He looked at her violet skin, her golden eyes, the woman who had walked into hell just to hear the rain again. He didn't just tap back. He turned his hand over and interlaced his fingers with hers. A human grip, a solid anchor. He nodded, yes. It wasn't a contract, it wasn't a performance. It was a beginning.